Hello, and welcome to Insightful Conversations with your host, Three Principles practitioner, Adey-Jones. Join her each week as she welcomes some of the world's leading Three Principles teachers and practitioners who share how this understanding has dramatically improved the quality of their lives and the lives of those they work with.
Chipman is recognized worldwide as a consultant, facilitator, public speaker, and guide, dedicated to sharing the true nature and essence of the principles of mind, consciousness, and thought. Along with his wife, Jen, he was privileged to be guided by his mentor, Sydney Banks. Together, they have worked with businesses, non-profit organizations, drug and alcohol rehab centers, inmates and staff in prisons, or just simply with people seeking more peace and understanding in their lives. In 2008, at the urging of Sydney Banks, Chip co-founded, along with Elsie Spittle, the Three Principles School, dedicated to sharing the simplicity and purity of the three principles, as discovered and taught by Sydney Banks. Welcome, Chip. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, thank you, Del. It's a pleasure. Thanks for that really nice introduction, too. That was lovely.
That's lovely. Well, I'm so thrilled. We're actually going to have a lot of you in the next coming days. We've got a Three Principles community night, and
Yes.
we've got our soul-centered weekend with you, so I'm so excited.
Yeah, we're looking forward to it in both things, but the community thing was a nice surprise as well.
Yeah, that's wonderful. So I'd like to start at the beginning. What was your life like before you came across the principles? I always find that fascinating.
Well, it wasn't great just before. I mean, I'll try and make it as brief as possible. I mean, I grew up in let's say, a difficult home with some of the usual things we all experience, not everybody, but alcoholism, in my case, a little bit of violence as well. And so I grew up in that environment, and I had, as a result, my own hang-ups and insecurities about life. I met my wife in 1968 and got married in 69, and we were really, really happy for the first 2 or 3 years. Somehow I let go of all of that stuff and just really had a good time, but it slowly crept back into me and then into our relationship. And by the time we met Sid, which would have been, I think, 1975, 74, 75, our marriage was in rough shape, Jan and I, and I was pretty depressed and pretty angry person. And then Jan met Sid quite by accident, just ended up at his home quite by accident, and literally came home a different person. I wasn't there. And that's when it all kind of started for us.
Wow. So I really wanted to talk about this with you because I know I also, I didn't have violence, but I had a difficult childhood, and I definitely had a lot of thinking about what that meant, the meaning I applied to myself in that. And I know a lot of people have a hard time, a lot of my clients in particular, when they come to me, they have a hard time letting go of that past, that story about who they are and what they are as a result of their upbringing. So I know you had a sort of almost a miraculous change of heart with your father. So can you talk a little bit about that and how that came about?
Okay. Well, first of all, Jan meets Sid, and while I'm resistant for the first few weeks, people who know me know that story. Mm-hmm. I eventually, had my first insights, started to feel better. Our marriage, strangely enough, was really in good shape within 2 or 3 weeks of meeting Sid, which is miraculous in itself. It's hard to believe, really. And the funny thing is, I look back on that now, and I can't remember what we particularly tried to change or anything. Mm-hmm. It just became better. So anyway, I started finally going to hear Sid and listen to him, and slowly but surely got that feeling that he talks about. But there was one thing that always held me back. Sid would start talking about forgiveness, and I would immediately get upset or, in my head and thinking, you don't know what I've seen, so you can't talk to me about forgiveness, And one particular night, he gave this beautiful talk here on Salt Spring, and there might have been 30 or 40 people there, but at any rate, it was one of the first times I just kind of let go of listening to the words and just really got into the feeling. And then he started talking about forgiveness, and that feeling just came back, and memories came back, and I got upset, and I left the meeting early, and can't remember whether I called Sid or Sid called me the next morning. We were going to talk. Anyway, he asked me what was up, and I just said, Sid, honestly, when you talk about forgiveness, I understand intellectually that it's part of getting a quieter mind. I understand morally that it's kind of the best thing you can do, but you haven't seen what I've seen. So anyway, he invited me over to his house, and I drove over, and we sat down, and it was one of maybe 2 or 3 times in over 40 years that I knew Sid that we actually talked about the specifics of a problem that I had. And he said, "Well, tell me about it." And so I told him like the worst 2 or 3 stories I could think of. And Barb, his wife, was there as well, I think. And when I was finished, I could see it really kind of shook Sid up. He looked, very kind of concerned, And I thought, well, finally he understands why I can't look at this. And then he looked at me with all sincerity and he said, Chip, your father must have been truly suffering to have done those things. And I just plucked it out. I just went, what? My father was suffering? Are you kidding me? And I just was polite and left. And, I knew Sid would just let me sit with it, And it was I forget how long after, maybe 2 or 3 weeks after, I still was kind of hanging on to that. And I was laying in bed one night. Jan was asleep. And for some reason, I started thinking about some mean-spirited things I'd said before our marriage changed, before we started getting some insights. And I got that cringe, that feeling, oh God, how could I have said that? Like, can I ever take that back? And then I had this insight, and the insight was, that belongs in this world over here that you're not even living there anymore. You're living in a totally new world. And so it doesn't matter anymore what was said in that old world. And if you'd have known better then, you would have done better.
Wow.
And I just felt this peace come over me that I could just let go of sort of all the things I held against myself, particularly with my relationship with Jan. And I just had this really peaceful feeling as I laid there in bed, and I fell asleep, and I'd slept like 10 or 11 hours, which was quite unlike me. And when I woke in the morning, I felt really different. I couldn't get my finger on it. I felt good, but I couldn't get my finger on what the difference was. About 2 weeks later, I was in the same position. I was laying in bed, and for some reason, Jan was asleep, same thing. And I started to think about my last encounter with my father, which is when I left home. I was about 17, and it was not a pretty thing. It was terrible on both of our parts. And I got physically sick laying there in bed thinking about it, And then I just got this insight. I know it was from the one a couple of weeks ago, but it was like going deeper. I saw that my father was living in a world that was handed to him. And he didn't even know that another world existed beyond that. That's the only world he knew. And if he'd have known better, he would have done better. And I just saw that. And, people talk about a state of meditation. Well, when I saw that, my feeling was so amazing. I was shocked because I was laying there in bed, feeling a feeling of love from my father. This person who there's no getting around it. I'd held with hate and just terrible feelings for a long time. And I just had this peaceful feeling come over me. I really saw that he was innocent in his lostness. And I fell asleep, again, slept a long night. The next day I felt different, but this time I had a sense of what it was. If you could imagine in that kind of a relationship, how many volumes and volumes and volumes of thought and ways of interacting with the world that came out of that relationship. That's so much, and in that brief moment, volumes and volumes just fell away, and it literally changed my personality forever.
Wow. That's so beautiful. And it's, and you hit on it, it's that recognizing the psychological innocence, in ourselves and in others. And sometimes we recognize it in others and not ourselves, or vice versa. We see it in ourselves but not in others. But when you can really, really see that, and, in my childhood, my mother made some choices which I loved her dearly, but I was like, how could you, what made you make those choices? And I couldn't get over it. I just thought, I love her, but, that was crazy. And then it hit me that, I didn't grow up in the war, in World War II, or have to serve at 17. I didn't get her life. I didn't get, so how could I even begin to judge her thinking and her choices? It's a completely different environment that she grew up in. Like you said, like your father, that's what was handed him. And I don't think she saw it could be any different either.
Yeah, I found out after my dad passed, I really didn't know, but after he passed, I found out how much he'd suffered as a kid. In much the same way, of course. That's the way it gets handed down through generations.
Yeah, yeah. I love what you say, the dysfunction stops with you and your family.
That's one of the things for people that haven't heard me before that I love the most about Principles. I love that it's going out through all these wonderful teachers worldwide. I love that the internet's moving it. But more than that, I look at, as you said, Del, in my family, it stops with me. My kids are really healthy, happy people. My grandchildren are healthy, happy people. They'll never have to even imagine what my life was like before this understanding. And so in that sense, I just think of there's these thousands and thousands now of these little families out there who have that benefit of stopping literally generations of suffering going forward. I think that's amazing.
It is. I think sometimes we think we need to be doing bigger, greater, grander things with the three principles. But like you say, if it just in how we lead our lives and the impact and the influence that has on our children and how that spreads out. And if we all just personally, valued that, we would change the world.
I think that's the deepest way the world's going to change for sure. It's kind of like going back to that whole thing about germ theory. It took a while for people to realize that germs were causing all this illness. And the first doctors, as you know, that talked about it were pretty much laughed out of the profession. But over time, people saw who got results, whose patients didn't die of infections. And I really think the Principles are like that in the sense that they're the germ theory of psychology, thought, and really a powerful understanding of what really causes our mental anxieties and illnesses and insecurities. It's very similar. It will take time in that similar way, but it's the folks we see like yourself and all people over the world who are living in a different way that will draw people more and more to this over time.
Yeah. And I want to go back a minute too to what you were saying before about the impact of this understanding on your relationship with Jan, even though neither one of you consciously tried to make anything change. It just naturally, to talk more about that, about what happened within you and within Jan separately, and how it came together and affected your relationship.
Well, Jan came home from her visit with Sid, or encounter with Sid, and tried to tell me about it. We'd been searching for a long time through Zen and so on. And I just blew it off when she came home. I just wouldn't accept it. And in fact, I got angry with her for some reason. I kind of know why now. And, she tried to tell me a bit about it for a while longer. And the more she tried, the harder I resisted. And then Jan had an insight. Sometime when she talks, she'll probably talk about it. She had an insight one day where she was looking at me and realized that she didn't have to try and change me. She saw something in me inside that was nothing to do with what was on my face or in my head. And she just saw that. And she just stopped trying to tell me about the Principles and Sid Banks and the change and everything. And what that did for me was left me on my own to really look at what was going on. And so really what happened was over time, I began to see that Jan's change was sustained and that it was real and she really was in a better place. And so out of that, my confusion turned to curiosity, and I started listening and started having some insights. But the main one for me with Jan and my, at the time, my son, my daughter hadn't been born yet. We'd gone to a few talks and I was still kind of resistant, but thinking there's something here, but I don't understand it. And Jan, of course, has been just in a really great space for a few weeks. So one morning, I was sitting on the couch and in our living room, and Jan was on the floor with our son playing, and the sun was coming in at a very sharp angle early morning into the window and shining in their hair. And I was looking at them, and then suddenly this feeling just rushed in, And I have no better way to say this, is I saw them. I saw my son and my wife, and I felt that love. And in that moment, I just knew none of the stuff we've been worried about meant a thing. That's what counted, was what I saw in that moment. And the only thought I had in that moment was, all I have to do is surrender. There's nothing to figure out. And that's when it really started for me, with our relationship in particular.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I also just want to add this little thing here for people listening that are like, so that's it? From that point forward, everything is like, amazing and there's never another conflict or anything. But it's, what it is once you've tasted that, you know that that's where home base is, basically. We're going to get caught up. We're going to have our, human moments when, well, I'm talking for myself, where I forget sometimes and I can get nitpicky and forget. But it is that remembering that, who each one of us is. The other thing I also find fascinating in relationships is the separate realities. Just really, giving the other person the permission to just be, themselves in their own thought-created reality, and they don't have to see it the same way as we see it. And that I find very, very helpful too.
I love the way you put all of that, Elle. It's really true. It's like, you start to get to the point where you've had the experience of seeing soul to soul and seeing who the other person really is. So yeah, you get tired after a couple of weeks somewhere and you're working hard, your feeling drops, you get into all this bunch of stupid old thought, but you always know that home base is there. I love the way you put that. And that's an enormous difference. Like, we were talking, Jan and I, to a group of addicts one night, and there was one guy sitting in the front who looked a little bit concerned or disturbed, and he finally put up his hand and he said, are you telling me that you're just going to be happy all the time, there's no ups and downs? And I said, well, I am so sorry if I gave that impression. Because no, you go up and down, but you know where home, like you said, you know where home is. You know that it's possible to have that feeling of love and balance, and that it's bigger than anything you can think. So when you're in your thinking, you still know that. I look at it this way. I can still have some of the terrible thoughts I had, say, 45, 50 years ago, right? I can still have those thoughts if I get tired enough and worn out enough, right? The difference being, the huge difference being, that back then I thought that was reality. Now I know it's just a passing cloud. It's just thought. It's not the true reality. It's not who I am, and it will pass. That is a huge difference, even if the thoughts are identical.
Yeah. Exactly, it is. It's just, I love this space of just, again, all my feelings are as strong, if not stronger than they've always been. But I watch, there's an observer there just watching me cycle through them and going, whoa, wow, that's a big reaction. But there's something watching it. I'm not in the throes of it. I'm not at the mercy of it. I'm watching it, and I have the patience to just let it move on when it's ready to move on, and without judgment. Resistance as well.
Yeah, to have that space between you and the reality that you observe, and to be kind to yourself when you do drop down, not see it as a big deal. I think, actually out in the community, I think that's one of the biggest things that people could look at that would help. Just being kind to yourself and accepting your humanity.
Yeah.
Like, your life is getting hundreds of times, thousands of times better, but you're still going to have days when it's not. And I hear a lot of people saying, kind of, I shouldn't be doing that still. Well, it's not it. It's like, you get to live in a better space more of the time. The other things visit less of the time and don't go as deep. And your life just gets better and better. So being kind to yourself is actually helping you to move in that direction.
Yeah, I love that. And it's so funny. I think in the beginning, I certainly, in the beginning for me, I still felt I was doing it wrong. If I was still getting caught up in my thinking or having a busy mind, there was something wrong with that. And it took me a while, or certainly a good year, to really understand that there was nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that. And that's really not what we're pointing to. It's just the knowing that whatever we're going through is not permanent and it'll pass.
That's
and
for sure.
again, as you said, just the focusing on the being loving and gentle with ourselves and others who are going through their stuff too.
Yeah, I feel like when we look at ourselves, if we, we have to be honest with ourselves about what we're going through. But if we stop at observation, that's more than enough.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Simple observation, without judgment, without a feeling about it. Because if we just do simple observation, we just notice, then we grow from it, we change.
Mm-hmm.
But if we beat ourselves up, or we shouldn't have, then we're actually walking backwards at that point.
No, exactly. And I also want to go back to what you're saying too about the, Jan wanting to teach you the principles. I've noticed as a parent that when I was so excited when I first came across them, I was like, wanted to teach my teenagers or my young adults. And it was like, no, Mum, that's your thing. But what I have seen is that, because they were still living with me, or are still living to this point, like they're moving this week, but just the last 3 years of observing how I live my life, it was far more effective than trying to teach them the principles.
Hear, hear.
Yeah. So talk a bit about that, because I know you have children. And how old were your children when you...
When we met Sid, our daughter hadn't been born yet. She was born on Salt Spring after we moved here. But our son was, I want to say 4 maybe. Mm-hmm. And we moved to Salt Spring and got quite involved with Sid and trying to get this message out and stuff. And our daughter came along, which was great. And when our son was maybe, I'm just guessing here, my memory's not that great on it, maybe 7 or 8, 7 probably. Sid was at the house one day, and I said, Peter had been just having a hard day, just as 7-year-olds will. Mm-hmm. I said something to Sid about, where should I start with teaching the kids the principles? He just looks at me, so don't do that. Yeah. And I said, oh, really? And he said, they're way ahead of you. Mm-hmm. They're way ahead of you. Even no matter what's going on in their behavior, they're way ahead of you. They're closer to that. He said, if you just have a loving home full of security, that's the principles for them. They'll get it. And so we did. We never taught our kids anything about it. But as they became teenagers, we would start to see one of Sid's tapes or books on their side table in the bedroom. Mm. We still just left it alone. And they both love it now. In their own ways, they share it in their work and they share it with other people. And more than that, they're like, to me, my kids are like fish in water with all of this. They don't feel like the need to talk about it all the time. They just live it. And I love watching them interact with their friends and their kids and the professional relationships and so on. I just see that they have, it's almost like they have an understanding without words, Del, if that makes any sense.
Well, yeah, especially as we know that they're operating whether we know about them or not. So, my boyfriend is, he has a little understanding by watching what I do, but he just naturally lives from that place. I was not naturally living from that place, so I needed more training. But it is, it's so beautiful, like you say, that just to impact each other through having this awareness. I call it, like, again, besides the show, I don't particularly like talking about the principles. I like living life with my 3P glasses on. I see through that lens, and I see when I'm in difficult situations, I'm so easy to just sort of, or rather, like I just had a difficult situation yesterday where I was so grounded and I just didn't get triggered by anything. I could see a lot of emotional turmoil around me. And I just sort of saw it for what it was. I thought, oh, this person's having a lot of thinking right now. And I mean, before, I used to take so many things personally. And this time it didn't have any effect on me. Basically somebody said I was stupid and that why didn't I think like a normal person? And I actually found it amusing. I was thinking, wow, that's an interesting thing to say or to think. But that's all it was. It was interesting. It wasn't... And
you staying in that feeling is the teaching.
Yeah.
That is the teaching, No matter... It comes down to that no matter what, whether you can speak eloquently or in a scientific way about the principles, or you've got a huge body of knowledge that you want. If if you're not living in that feeling, there is no message.
Yeah, that's
The
true.
message is your state of mind you're feeling.
Yeah, I was ever so
That's
grateful
beautiful.
for it yesterday. But so we're actually coming, it's a very short interview, but a conversation rather, but I want you to talk a little bit about the school, because I've had the privilege of being there a couple of times, and I know you just finished the last one in November, and you have another one coming up in June, which I hope to be at. So tell us a little bit how that came about, and what you and Elsie are up with that.
Yeah, this year we may be a little early, it might be end of May, but it'll be
Oh,
around
okay.
that time. So anyway, about a year before Sid passed, he came down to stay with us in Florida for a little bit. And we ended up in a conversation where basically he was telling me he knew that his time was going to be limited, you know. And he hadn't even been diagnosed yet, I don't think officially, but then he did while he was actually diagnosed while he was visiting us. And so just near the end of that visit, we'd been in Florida at that point for like 24 years, or 23 years or something like 23 years. And just at the end of it, he said, if it works out, why don't you move back up to Salt Spring, and we'll be able to talk a lot more and work a lot more before I'm gone. And I'm like, whoa. So it took us probably another 10 or 11 months, to change our life, pack up our life, and move back up to Salt Spring, but we did. And many conversations with Sid about something he wanted to go on after he passed, and that was one place, one venue, whatever you want to call it, where the principles were presented in the simplest form possible, without any discussion of applications and problems and issues. That's fine. There's other venues where that's perfect for that. But he wanted one place where it was simple and direct, from the heart, and he basically was asking for the school. And I got together with Elsie and we co-founded it based on Sid's wishes. And we've tried I think we've done a pretty good job of staying with that simplicity and sharing it as best we can anyway, in that way that Sid did, which was from the feeling, from the heart, and directly pointing to that mystical experience that happened with him. That was really the beginning of the change. I mean, it's lovely that people can talk about the principles. People think that sometimes the principles are a form of psychology, and they're not. They're just the principles. They produce everything, but they inform psychology at such a profound level about what it could be and what it could do. So the school is a place where we just stay back with that simplicity, and we leave it to the therapists who come, the psychologists who come, the ordinary people who come, to go out, find their own voice, and express it in their own way as they go out in the world. So that's really the purpose of the school. And I've loved every minute of it, and I've loved when you've been there too, Del. It's been really nice.
Well, I have to say it's been in the silences, not because we have those beautiful moments when there's those long silences where we're just soaking in the feeling that I've had. I mean, the first year I went, I had this profound healing, I can only put it that way, something that I'd carried with me for years that I was able to heal from. And I was so thrilled. I was like, oh, well, that's a once-in-a-lifetime experience. I'm not going to experience that again. I'm just going to go and have a lovely time in Salt Spring. And then the second year I was there, again, it was in the silences that I just had this profound, overwhelming, visceral feeling. So none of it was going on in my head. It was just a body, full-on body reaction that was so incredible that I can just, that was life-changing both times. An experience that, I'll have with me forever.
That makes me so happy to hear that, Del. It really does.
Yeah. So anyway, we are at the end of our time. I want to thank you so much. And as I said, I'm really looking forward to spending some time with you this coming weekend. So.
Great. Can I just clear something up quickly?
Sure, absolutely. Please do.
Oh, and I don't know how to fit it in, but just that my family may see this or something, but my dad, this guy that was so terrible for so long, he really saw this in his way and found his own psychological innocence and lived in a very healthy way for the last part of his life. I just wanted to make
Oh,
that clear, so he's not the bad guy in this.
no, I know. And I know you mentioned that he got to be a grandfather, he got to be with your children, and it's a wonderful story of transformation and what this understanding can do.
Well, Del, thank you
Yeah.
so much. I really enjoyed this.
Yeah. Thank
I look
you.
forward to seeing you soon, right?
Yes, definitely. Okay. Take care. Bye bye.
Bye, Del.
Bye bye.